All right, hey everyone, thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Soundbites. Today we have Chris Kinner, a really interesting background, really that we're going to explore, from working at some of the biggest financial institutions on the planet to moving to e-commerce platforms and running verticals there, to leveraging his experience to taking a new entrepreneurial journey. We're really excited to have you on, Chris, and we want to hear that whole path. Like, what took you from cognitive neuroscience to hedge funds, to bicycles, to GovTech, to e-commerce, and now what you're doing now? Like, that's a fascinating path, and we want to explore it.
How much time you got, Derek? I'll try to do the short version, and then we can dig in. Derek, Lauren, great to be here. Thanks for the time. It actually starts before Harvard. Again, I'll try to do the short version of this, but it's kind of hard to tell my story without starting with my parents. My dad was in the Coast Guard, and my mom was sort of not maybe the first or second wave of women on Wall Street. So my mom was in banking and private equity in New York City. I was actually born in New York City when my dad was stationed on Governor's Island. It used to be a military base. He was the captain of a big ship there. My mom was working in sort of downtown area. And then I grew up, I was born in Manhattan, but it's actually not true because I grew up in this incredible little island oasis in the middle of New York Harbor where very different experience. Anyway, my dad got transferred to Portland, Maine when I was 4 or 5. My mom was like, no way am I moving to Maine. And so we moved out to Connecticut as sort of this compromise. And so a lot of my childhood was honestly, my dad was gone a lot because he was at sea. My mom was gone a lot because she was in the city. And we used to meet sort of halfway during the winter at a place that my parents owned up in Vermont and go skiing on the weekends. And so very, very early on, I was a ski racer. I sort of went through all the development programs and stuff like that and got pretty good. I was, I think 11 or 12 and started to think about taking this pretty seriously. I actually went to a pretty elite ski racing academy up in Vermont called Green Mountain Valley School, where everyone there, every single student there were 100 kids in the school. Everyone was trying to make it onto the U.S. ski team and eventually to the Olympics. So I did ski racing first. There's a long story in there. I'm happy to go into the details, but just to sort of give you guys the overview. Ski racing, I carried that all the way through college. I raced D1, loved it, had a great time. At the end of college, I had a couple of good coaches and mentors who pulled me aside and said, hey, Chris, you're good. You could do this. This is how that might work. You also, have half a brain. You might want to think about a post-skiing career. I knock wood, I am the only ski racer that I know that never had a knee surgery. So I got out of there
unscathed.
More or less. And anyway, so I quit ski racing after college. And then the first 5 years or so of my career was really a little bit of trial and error, trying to figure out what came next. I had a big void to fill. And I got it wrong a few times. You listed sort of all the places that I've been, Derek. It was a long succession of, let me try this and see if that works. And maybe try this again. Eventually, I got introduced to a guy who honestly has changed my life, sales manager at a bicycle manufacturer, who sort of pulled me in and said, hey, Chris, I can teach you to sell. And if you can sell, you can do anything. Everything is sales. And from that moment on, that was right around 2015. It's been sales, people management, faster and faster growing companies, higher and higher tech companies, all the way up to very recently. My wife's been along for the journey. She's an important part of the story, but I'll leave you with the teaser and then we can get into the details. We were sitting at the dinner table in March, maybe it was April of this year. And Elizabeth, my wife, was like, hey, Chris, you've been daydreaming about this thing that it's called a search fund. You've been talking about this search fund thing for literally a decade, almost as long as we've been married and maybe more. If you don't do it right now, you are literally never going to do it. And so that was sort of the push that gave me, the shove over the edge to dive into the new entrepreneurial adventure. And so that's where I am right now.
That's awesome. That's a really fascinating story. Probably the most interesting piece of it is you made it through a ski career without a meniscal tear or something like that. I mean, I think Lauren tore a meniscus running a 5K. So it
was a half marathon. Thank you so much. But yeah, I wasn't going anywhere fast. So yeah.
I have one other claim to fame as a ski racer, and I'll throw this in case any of my ski racing friends are listening to this. I am the only skier that I know who has never been to Mount Hood in Oregon, which is like a rite of passage when you're a skier in the summertime. There's always a training camp in Mount Hood, and for one reason or another, I just never made it work. So that makes me a bit of a black sheep in the community, but I never made it out there.
So what you're going to be Whistler, Mount Hood, and Jackson Hole are kind of like you have to do all of those to actually have any kind of credit at all, and
something like
you missed
that,
one. Man, brutal.
Maybe that's why you didn't mess up your knee. Maybe it was all fortuitous. Maybe it was a good thing you didn't make it.
Yeah, it's possible.
So I think it's really interesting that you had this sort of chance meeting, with someone in the bike industry saying, if you can work in sales, you can do anything. What do you think it is about that profession that sort of sets you up for success in so many different ways?
I kind of drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. Everything is sales, right?
Yeah.
I think about sales. Some people think sales is a dirty word. I love sales. Like sales, and just to be clear, I have not been a salesperson for a very long time. I sort of did a short period as a salesperson, and then have just sort of been around sales and strategy operations roles my whole life. But the ability to understand a customer's needs and then adapt your presentation or your offering to fit that need and solve that problem, right? It's a very selfless act to be able to think about and, put yourself in that person's shoes and try to understand their motivations and their needs and their desires and whatever it is. It actually, for me, clicked a lot of different things that I had sort of been putting together and learning about throughout my whole college and, even before that, but my early career, just about how people are different. And I love learning about how people are different and what makes them tick, and then thinking about ways that I can convince them or help them understand, the solutions that I might be able to offer.
I think that's a good way to look at it. I think a lot of people, they hear sales as a dirty word, and they hear the used car person pushing merch down somebody's throat, which is different than truly working to understand somebody's problems and needs, and then connecting that to a solution that will actually help them and provide value. Right. I think that's the big difference between being a slimy salesperson and then someone that's really delivering value for a customer that builds strong relationships. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you've used the sales approach of building relationships to kind of push career from step to step to step. And now you're starting a fund where you have to basically sell your concept, sell yourself, sell your idea to be able to raise that level of funding to be able to get to the next step. So that's probably, would you call that one of the most invaluable pieces of your career path?
Absolutely. It's all been leading up to this. I'll give a little bit of context. It's actually even worse than it sounds. So the thing that I'm doing is called a search fund. I'm not sure how many of your listeners are going to know what that is. The Stanford Graduate School of Business has kept track of almost everybody who's ever done this since the 80s, and the number is around 500 or 600 total people who have done it in this particular way. Look, I'm an entrepreneur. I am interested in buying a small business. The fun part is that I actually don't know which business I want to buy yet. And it's going to take me a long time to go find one. And so the search fund is designed, it's this very interesting structure in sort of the private equity investing world where I'm raising, call it seed capital, to effectively pay myself a small salary and a little bit of time, expenses, travel, legal fees, due diligence fees, to then go spend upwards of 2 years digging through the network of small business owners in the United States, of which there are 30 million. So it's going to take a while to go find a really high quality business that I can purchase. And then I will become the CEO of that business. And so it's a really cool opportunity to develop some real investor skills on the upfront. And then once I find a great business to purchase, whatever the characteristics of that business end up looking like, to then become the CEO and owner of that business and to run it and grow it as my own. It's this cool dual nature, you get to be an investor and an operator almost within the same package. So there have been a few people, 500 or 600 people who have done this since the 80s. But it's still a little bit unusual in the investor world. And so, yeah, the sales background has definitely helped. I'm a little bit unusual in this ecosystem in that everybody else who does this comes out of an MBA program and learns about it
Sure.
at their MBA. So I've come in and been like, hey, I'm doing this, one, the old school way, because it's changed a little bit over the last couple of years. And two, I'm coming in from a non-traditional background with a whole pile of experiences and skills that I have to then explain to these investors and convince them that even though I don't fit all of their neat little check boxes, that I'm still a good candidate for this opportunity.
And I think you're uniquely positioned, right? Like you look at your background in financial services, you've been in the sales area, you've been product management effectively, you've run a business unit at a large e-commerce platform. So you've got a lot of the things ticked to be able to be that operator while still having the ability to perform all the due diligence required from a financial aspect. And those skill sets are I guess, rare when they're separated. And to your point, people coming out of MBA programs might do it, but what's probably the traditional MBA route to a search fund would be high net worth individual families saying, your son just graduated from HBS, good skill set, good knowledge base. Here is that $1, $2, $3 million to go purchase your next venture and go be an operator, right? I think that's a lot of how it's operated recently.
I don't know that I would characterize it quite like that. I'd actually say that the business schools themselves, so there's like two schools of thoughts. The search fund idea kind of came up. There's like a Harvard Business School and Stanford GSB, sort of East Coast, West Coast kind of funny thing. But there are a couple of core individuals who are at each of those schools that came up with this idea. This guy, Irv Grosbeck, comes up a lot in the community. But it's actually, I think in recent years, the MBA programs have got classes on this kind of stuff, right? And there are professors teaching about it. And so a lot of the funds that have invested in search funds, the fund of funds, have actually started going to these MBA programs and frankly just recruiting guys off of campus.
Oh, okay.
Which is great, right? It's like it's almost like ready made for if you're a newly minted MBA. Like here comes this opportunity to be both an investor and an operator. Try your chops, right? With the backing of a great investor network. For me, it's more of a I'm aware of the fact that my skills and experiences lend themselves to being better in the operating side, and so I've deliberately sought out investors who have the ability to help me on the deal side because that's where I need the most help, right? Like, yes, I in theory over the next 2 years will become very, very good at it, but it is a very steep learning curve. And there are frankly plenty of pitfalls that I'd love to avoid. And so that's why I've been deliberately looking for folks who can help me as I source and, evaluate and do due diligence on a business.
You mentioned when you were chatting with your wife about getting started on this search fund that you've been thinking about it for years and years, at almost 10 years. What do you think about, what about this concept do you think has kind of been in the back of your brain rattling around as you've been going through these other endeavors?
It's a good question. A lot of it is I attribute to a couple of individuals. I had some very, very good friends in college, undergrad, who did go to business school and then did search funds sort of right out of business school. And this was right around the 2014, 2015 timeline. And I remember, hearing about some close friends who did this and just thinking, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard of. I'd never heard of the model before. And so that was kind of the seed that sort of got planted. But honestly, when I think back to even like growing up as a kid, talking to my mom about some of the things that she was investing in, interesting businesses that she was checking out on a weekly basis, I've always had sort of that, hey, maybe being an investor of some sort and flavor would be good for me. I had a little bit of a contrarian streak in college and had to go do it the hard way, do it my own way. And so this feels a little bit like I've come back to this opportunity with a like a tailor-made model just for me that is going to work really well.
Now, I like that approach, especially because when you think about just being an investor or even operating in a hedge fund, you almost don't feel like you are the person that's adding the actual value, right? By running a business, you're throwing money over the wall, you're hoping that you bet on the right horse, you're looking for a certain return, you move on to the next project, and you don't get to see things and solve the right level of problems from beginning to end, which are really fun. Like those are, like, I think Lauren and I talk about this a lot. The strategic problem solving aspect of running your own business is probably the scariest and most fun aspect of it versus just throwing the capital at it.
Yeah. I mean, the ability to, and there's a reason that search funds focus on small businesses, right? There's like incredible opportunity, both financially and other, but I'm also really interested in just sort of the network in the community of the small business community in the United States. Small organizations where people really matter on an individual level. Like, sign me up for that. That's what I'm really interested in.
Yeah, are you getting involved locally with some of the small incubators or the startup communities around you, or is that coming up soon?
I haven't I've done a few networking things. Frankly, I'm a little bit busy with a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old right now, and
Sure.
so
Do it.
my time is a little bit limited. My wife, I think I told you guys when we first met. My wife's an equities trader in New York City, so she's like on the 5 a.m. train in the morning and gone.
Ooh,
And so no, the nights and weekends are frankly for my family, and so haven't done a whole lot of the local stuff yet.
got it. So go ahead.
Sorry, I was just wondering if there were certain industries as you go about this search fund, like, what's your focus? What are you excited about searching for throughout this 24-month process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll give you a little bit of context before I answer it. There are a couple of schools of thought in the search fund ecosystem. So, and I'm, by the way, anybody who's taken any of these classes at these business schools is going to laugh at me because I'm probably going to get half of this wrong, but that's okay. A lot of the more recent thinking has shown demonstrably with data that if you have an industry-focused thesis at the beginning of your search, that you are more likely to uncover high-quality acquisition opportunities earlier on and sort of get better deal flow if you start with an industry focus. On the flip side of that, a lot of the sort of old school wisdom, frankly, that I've chatted with folks who've been in this industry for a long time. There's just an element of serendipity that you can't account for. Like, who knows where the good business opportunities end up, and so. A lot of folks are basically like, hey, you have to start searching somewhere in a specific industry, but then inevitably over the course of the 2 years, you're going to pivot and change and adapt and find new interesting things.
Sure.
So with that in mind, I also know, again, given sort of my background and experience, I don't come into this with a whole lot of preconceived notions about investment theses, right? I have some friends who did a couple years in private equity or did a couple years at iBanking and like had some of these some frankly like good ideas coming into this. I'm in this phase where I know that I need to develop that, and so I've been working to develop that, but a lot of that is the work of the search, and so
Sure.
to some extent a little bit of that's coming. So with all that preamble, I'm really interested in, there is an incredible intersection, I think, right now between healthcare and technology,
Sure.
where there are just like obvious tailwinds in the healthcare industry all over the industry. And then software is eating the world, right? And so finding an opportunity to merge those two sort of industry verticals, whatever you want to call it, and then the search fund. So within the search itself, I'm going to be looking for a couple of sort of horizontal business model types. So recurring revenue, a certain margin expectation, things like that. So it's finding the right way to apply that horizontal to the appropriate vertical niches within the healthcare industry that will allow me to go look at really good businesses and frankly find owners who are willing to sell their business to me, their baby to me, right? A lot of this is, we talk about it in sort of investor terms, but there's a very, very significant human element in this. And I can't outcompete with a professional private equity firm who's got a lot of money to spend on, rolling up businesses. So to some extent, I need to be able to get in front of enough business owners and frankly make them like me and convince them that I'm pursuing something worthwhile and that I'll take care of their baby a little bit. And that it's just shots on goal after that.
Yeah, and when again, back to that relationship element, you're building relationships to raise the fund and building relationships for people that are acquisition targets for your fund, which is kind of complicated, but it's still exciting at the same time. And you mentioned healthcare space. We agree with you. We think healthcare is huge for a lot of reasons, especially with the advent of the Internet of Things coming through that industry in a big way.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is creates a lot of opportunities. And it's also showing a lot of entrepreneurs coming into this space that are building something and then wanting to move on to the next project pretty rapidly. So I think the amount of targets you're going to have are pretty high. And industrial scientific, I guess, is tangential to that. But what's fascinating about industrial scientific in the space, like companies like Thermo Fisher and Becton Dickinson being the largest ones, are the whole process is going through, I guess, I hate to use the term, a digital transformation. Like we're talking about laboratories that were pen and paper, like manually tetrating things, to now everything is being digitally metered and stored, right? So it's a fascinating space with a lot of transformation happening right now. And I think what people don't realize is like in the healthcare industry, the margins currently are actually small. So these types of projects that can disrupt these spaces have the opportunity to grow big margins versus the traditional margin structure that they've had.
I think too. So that's really. I'm curious. Maybe we can dig a little bit into how you guys think about it from a data perspective, because there's obviously a ton of data out there. Maybe
Sure.
too much. I come back to the human element of healthcare too, right? At the end of the day, healthcare is about helping people. And as a consumer of healthcare myself, right, like over the course of my sort of figure it out period in my career, my wife and I moved 6 times in 6 years. And I took, a bunch of different jobs, and they all had different insurance policies and whatever. So we went through the process of finding healthcare providers for our family several times. And I always, there's like this cognitive dissonance between that experience and then all of the work that I've done in my career, thinking about that consumer journey, right? The customer journey, thinking about how do I put myself in the shoes of this customer? How do I make it more efficient or easier for them to do that job? I just think that there's such tremendous opportunity to, frankly, make the experience better for people who are trying to seek out healthcare opportunities.
We went through this recently as we were changing insurance providers. We were putting a group plan together, and we had 4 or 5 of the local the operators in North Carolina, the big ones, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, United, things like that. And we're trying to compare what we thought would be an apples to apples comparison, and it's near impossible. Like it's just unbelievable. And we got to the point where we were like, okay, well, we're going to make the best decision that we think we're going to make. And if it's wrong, I guess we only have a year to live with this mistake. But it's kind of scary. It's high stakes.
It is kind of, I remember calling Derek on the phone. I was like, I have a college degree. I'm not an idiot. Why can't I read any of this and understand it? And I do think that's something that's lacking in healthcare, which is fundamentally a human, it's all based on like patient care. But I feel like that's often lost in a lot of the processes. So I think it is kind of ripe for some sort of transformation, some sort of overhaul.
Yep. We had collectively $500,000 in education, and we couldn't figure. We were really struggling with it. And then we were talking with one of our other friends whose mother has been on Cobra for 6 years.
Oh wow!
And so they're way overpaying what she should be paying, but she's staying on Cobra because she understands the providers. She knows they're covered, so she's willing to pay 3 times more because it's too difficult to really sort out. And this is somebody who is they're smart people, right? And you think about, what do people who are not as well versed, how do they do it? And that's 60%. I'd say 60% of the population. I'll put us in the top 50%.
It's probably generous.
I'm sure there's some smart entrepreneur out there solving for this, but I remember, my wife and I have had 2 kids, and over the course of the years, trying to figure out which plan do I take within the healthcare opportunity, the insurance options. And I've built so many spreadsheets in my life trying to figure out the optimization, and it just doesn't ever work out.
Is it silver versus gold? Which one matters? Like, how am I going to get the payback? How much do I put in an HSA? Like, dude, it's super confusing industry.
Yep.
So the end goal of this is you're going to be a CEO of some TBD company, which is, exciting. So what excites you about that? And maybe what scares you? What are those 2, ends of the spectrum?
I can't wait. There is an element, I hate to call it romantic, but like the entrepreneurial dream of like being the boss and calling my own shots and being the guy, the buck stops here, right? Like I'm very excited about that. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to work in small teams and large teams. And frankly, like the arc of my career up to this point brought me to bigger and bigger and bigger companies. And then I got to a point where I was like, hey, I'm just one of like 20,000 people at some point. I want to go back to the small side. I want to go back to the tiny companies where individuals matter. I have, for a very long time been sort of a student of leadership in a variety of different ways. So I've been an athlete where I received coaching. I've been a coach where I used to teach people how to do. I used to teach kids how to race sailboats.
Oh, really cool.
Yeah, I'm like the most New England guy that you guys probably picked up. I got to be a little bit careful how I introduce this out here. Anyway,
Very, very relatable, racing sailboats and professional skiing.
For what it's worth, I did a restoration project over this past winter and took apart my 50-year-old boat and put it back together with my dad.
That's
so
cool.
Really
we're not
cool.
talking like
You can roll up your sleeves.
Yeah, got him.
But did you play lacrosse at any point?
I did, in fact, play lacrosse in high school. But my wife's got me beat. She was the captain of her team. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, I keep lacrosse sticks just chilling right next to my desk just for fun.
I joke with my wife. I want to teach my girls how to ski and how to sail and do all these incredible things, but they better learn how to play lacrosse from her. Because I want to go sit on the side of a warm, sunny field, not freeze my butt off on the side of a mountain.
That sounds better. It's a better strategy.
Anyway, so why am I attracted to the opportunity? It's the people. I want to be back in that opportunity where I can help and develop people. Honestly, I like to think of my sort of management style as a very people-first management style. I love working with people who have talent and sort of figuring out what makes them tick. How are they motivated? What situations can I put them in to allow them to grow and do better? And I've always had this idea of like, I forget who said it, but if you're the smartest person in the room, you're doing it wrong. Like I love surrounding myself with people who have talent and ambition and just learning from them. And I think that there's massive opportunity to do that in the small business world. And then what scares me about it, it's a risk, right? I mean, this is entrepreneurship. There's a chance that this doesn't work out so well. I forget exactly what the updated numbers are, but something like 30% of people who raise a search fund actually never acquire a business because they run out of time and money before they find a good acquisition target that they can then convince their investors to pile on in. And so my wife and I are kind of like, hey, there's a clock on this. It's a very, very real clock. And then so to mitigate that, right, there's a really strong focus on finding existing, stable, profitable businesses that there's kind of a trend to look for boring businesses, right, frankly, because I'm not looking for bleeding edge. I'm not looking for something where there's real disruption happening. I'm looking for something that's a little bit steady Eddie so that I can then go in and learn how to do well with that business from a stable platform. And try my chops because this is a first time for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have a guy that we used to work with quite a lot. Really smart dude, came from Ernst & Young, Ken. And he was like, if you're ever going to start a business, insurance. And I was like, it makes a lot of sense. He's like, it's not sexy. It's really boring. The math is proven and it works. And he's like, get a State Farm office locally, sell insurance. And I'm like, and I never really liked the idea, but like as I get a little older, I'm like, makes
insurance.
Ken knows what he's talking about. He's like tech companies, high risk. He's like done with tech companies, man. Insurance and pizza. Everyone needs both of them.
Wow. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So you met somebody that got you into the bike world that taught you about sales and the importance of sales. And you've developed your leadership style to be very human-centric, person-forward versus task-oriented. Who else has really influenced your life and really changed the way you thought about things?
Oh, man. There's a lot to unpack there. It's been a very, very long, like as old as I am, an accumulation at this point. So I'm struggling to figure out where to begin. I think it starts with my dad, honestly. So my dad was the captain of a couple of ships in the Coast Guard, 150, 200 people on board. They used to go, at one point, my dad was responsible for all of the aids to navigation. So the lighthouses and the buoys and all those sorts of things from the Canadian border to the Delaware Bay. So he would go up and down the coast of the East Coast of the United States in his ship, and they would go out to the buoys, pick them up, clean them off, make sure they're in the right spot and put them back down. He used to joke, maybe not joke, maybe it was serious, that, his job as the commanding officer was to make sure that at least one other person knew how to drive the ship. Because if he ever fell over the side, he'd want him to come back and get them. And so
kind of funny, but it's super great advice.
Yeah. And so he always, I think from a young age, I heard that and it became leader is teacher is sort of the mantra that I have. Like, you have to be a teacher first if you want to be a good people leader, because you have to be able to teach them to do whatever it is that needs to be done. And obviously that doesn't go, it's not a blanket statement. There are some technical skills that, like, I frankly would never be able to teach. Accounting, forget it. But as a leader of people, right, the ability to put people in situations where they can learn and grow, and frankly, get myself out of the way so that they can go do their thing. That's what I think I learned most from my dad. There have been a couple of other places along the way where I've worked for interesting managers. I've done a lot of research and reading on philosophy. I went through a real, like, Stoics phase, this like Ryan Holiday and those guys. I've read all of the stuff from Ray Dalio, which was really interesting. And there have been a couple of things that I have taken away from that. Jocko Willink has been an interesting. I love his podcast. He's a character, but the extreme ownership mentality, I just love that. And so I don't know. Over the years, I've just sort of pulled these pieces together and cobbled, my own little patchwork quilt of a philosophy, I guess, about
that's awesome.
How to do it.
No, that's really great. And I think Lauren and I had to do the same thing. And our biggest problem, we share a very similar flaw for a long time. And we had one of our mentors on. I mean, you're not aware of it. We had one of our mentors on who ended up sending us both to what we call asshole rehab, but that's another story. We'll talk about that a little bit. Okay. But effectively, at some point, there was this transition where we had to stop being the people that had all the right answers, the smartest people that just knew how to answer the question, and we had to get way, way, way better at being comfortable of asking better questions, not having the answers to them. And that was hard for me, but probably hard for Lauren, because like we'd always be the one. Someone would ask a question, we had an answer, we had a solution, we knew how to solve it. And then it's at some point, it's like, as the problems get more complicated, you have to be able to empower your team to be able to answer those questions. And then you have to be better at asking questions that can help scope how to solve the problem. And that was a big transition period. It was tough. It still kind of is, right?
That's really interesting. I'll be vulnerable for a moment here. I actually experience it in the other way. So the way that I think, I love to, I wait as long as possible to make a decision. I gather data, I look and evaluate, I balance ideas off of other people. I by nature am a relatively indecisive person. From the outside, at least. Whereas to me, it feels like, no, I'm not indecisive. I'm just actually like fact finding and haven't. So anyway, I had this pointed out to me by a couple of very good mentors early in my career, and have ever since been wildly aware of it when it happens in my brain. And it feels like when I finally decide something, it's like there's a this is nerdy science stuff, but have you guys ever watched ice form like in slow motion?
Yeah.
So it's like you cool the water, nothing, and then suddenly a little crystal forms, and then the whole thing locks up, right? Very quickly. That's how it feels like when I make a decision naturally. It's like nothing, and then suddenly, boom, I've got it, and the whole thing falls into place. So over the years, I've been very, very diligent, I think, trying to force myself to take that step back and say, hey, do you have 50% of the information? Do you have 80% of the information? Do you have enough to make half of a decision right now and at least take a step in the right direction? And so anyway, I maybe that's a superpower, maybe that's a weakness that I have to overcome, but like stepping into leadership positions with people, I usually take a default, like I know nothing stance. And I try to learn from everybody else who's been there before. And I think I've been fortunate in that I've never really jumped into a situation where I had to make quick decisions in order to survive. And so that, to some extent, this is circumstance. But it's been really interesting watching myself as I've sort of learned and developed through that.
That's great self-awareness. And there's a good book called Surrounded by Idiots that you might enjoy. And you sound like you're what's called a blue person. So blue people are very analytical. They want to have all the answers. They're going to ask a lot more questions than normal so they can fully understand it. Lauren and I fall into a bucket of red people, which is why we had to go to asshole rehab. But effectively, it's like we're more intuitive. We're going to be like, we're going to make a decision. And if we're wrong, we don't necessarily care because we're going to figure out that we're wrong. And we'll make a tweak, and we'll make a tweak, and we'll make a tweak. And we will, it might take us, we might step on a couple landmines along the way, but we're going to learn really, really fast whether that was the right direction or the wrong direction. It's like playing Minesweeper as opposed to having a laid out map before you go.
Yep.
But knowing it is really beneficial because it helps you determine, what your default mode is and when you're getting hung up and you need to make a decision. Yeah. Surrounded by Idiots.
Okay.
It's a good book.
Put that on I have a long list of books that I'd like to read at some point, but frankly, my reading
when you have time.
Yeah.
These days.
We had to go to, we basically had to force time for professional development, and like we'd get books on audio, right? And then just rip through it while you're at the work or doing a gym workout, something like that. Helps quite a bit. So of the roles you've had, which one has been your favorite so far?
Oh, my current, like hands down, I am doing what I need to be doing right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been pretty remarkable we've talked about this through the whole interview, but like all of these incredibly serendipitous occurrences have brought me to this point where it suddenly feels like I am challenged in a way that I haven't been challenged in 15 years. I'm excited. I'm energized. I'm meeting people who are incredibly inspirational. I just this is what I'm doing right now. And I'm thrilled to be here. If that's not allowed as an answer, I have to say teaching kids how to race sailboats has always been and will always be my dream job. It's literally like, so I grew up here in Connecticut, Long Island Sound. There are something like 50 or 100 different marinas. Each of them has like a little junior program. And then there's a ton of racing all summer long while the kids are out of school from like June to August. And so this is kind of like a part of just being, on the culture around here. So I used to go down and it's like, as a coach, these marinas have, coach boats. And so you jump in a little motorboat and all the kids have their little, sailboats that they're learning how to sail, and you just go out on the water for the whole day with a bunch of kids. And yeah, like we were trying to teach them some racing theory and a little bit of like the physics of sailing, which there's like a ton of the science side of this. But at the same time, it was like half of my job was honestly just throwing kids off of sailboats and keeping them excited because it's such a hard sport to learn that a lot of it was like, hey, let's make this fun and engaging and something that they want to keep coming back to. And so and it didn't hurt that the pay was pretty good too. So I will forever daydream about the day when I get to go back to doing that for my summers.
Do you think there's anything like, as I was going to say, do you think there's anything like as fun as that was, do you think there's anything that you took from that you put into previous jobs or, even this search fund that you have? Like, is there anything that you're taking from that as an experience and then maybe subconsciously integrating into what you're doing now?
Oh, sure. A lot of it, so there's the coaching piece of it, right? And I think being a coach, trying to coach athletes, even 7-8-year-old kids, like trying to figure out how to motivate people. That was one of the foundational threads that allowed me to figure out that sales was going to be so good. There's an element that I haven't figured out yet, and any of the search fund folks who listen to this are going to laugh at me. But I just think that the marine industry in general, both on the commercial consumer side and the sort of business side, is fascinating. Our world is mostly ocean, right? And to a large extent, I would love to find an opportunity that allows me to be part of what's called the blue economy, which is a term that I didn't know until very recently. But so any sort of the economy that is in some way affected by or touches the water. I just think it's an incredible resource, and the Earth's only got just so much of it, and we've got to be careful with it. So would love to find a way to integrate that into my work.
Well, I'm excited to see if you can make that happen. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Thanks.
So a question, and I don't know, Derek, if you had any other questions, but this is my favorite question, so I like to skip ahead to it. But we ask this of every guest, and so if let's say you are 18 or 25, you can pick the age. If you could sit down and have dinner with yourself, what advice would you give, or maybe what would you tell them, knowing what you know now?
I'm glad you sent me this one ahead of time because I had to think about it. I was 25. I'm going to put my age out here. Everyone's going to know how old I am. I was 25 in 2013. 2013 was when I met and started dating my wife. And so to my 25-year-old self, who, by the way, I knew my wife. We literally grew up together. So I've known her since she was 5.
I love that.
But we high school, college, I was away and gone and didn't date or anything like that. And then literally ran into each other out of sheer luck on a Thursday night and started dating. Anyway, 2013, I would tell my 25-year-old self, do not change a thing. Because the path from then to here has been, I have 2 beautiful daughters. I have an amazing wife. I have this incredible opportunity ahead of me. 18-year-old Chris, I would go back to me coming out of high school. So coming out of high school, I was still pretty hot on the ski racing thing, although I'd started to sort of say, hey, maybe there are options after this. What happens? I wish that I had gone and gotten an internship or a real job for a couple of years before I went to college. And it's hard to play the what if game here because, again, like all of the choices that I made sort of led me to this point. But when I look back on sort of my upbringing, my career, or my school history and all this stuff, I was single-mindedly focused on ski racing for so much of my childhood to the exclusion of almost everything else that I honestly didn't, coaching sailing in the summer times was fun, but it wasn't a business education. I wish that I'd gone and I'd worked somewhere, big business, small business. I don't know what it would be, but at least to sort of get my feet wet on that. And I think it would have helped influence the way that I thought about my college career as well a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit like I've been playing catch up in the business world since I graduated undergrad. And I think that a little bit of time to sort of clear my head, get my priorities right before I'd gone to college would have been a little bit beneficial.
I think not enough people understand how businesses evolve to deliver value, right? Like when you're younger, in high school, you don't really fully grasp that. You think of maybe being an employee, being an engineer, whatever it is, and you don't think about, at the end of the day, any kind of business is solving a problem or delivering value to somebody else, right? And then understanding the mechanism to do that, how to find that customer, how to solve that problem, how to put a supply chain together to get the parts, products, services to deliver that. Just understanding that, teaching product management at a high school level is probably super valuable. And I don't think people understand that that's even an option.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who have kids coming through high school, and children that go into college don't understand the options that are available to them. Right. And I think that's a disservice, which kind of stinks. And to your 25-year-old point, Lauren and I talk about this quite a bit. It's like the one phrase that changes the most people's lives without them ever realizing it at the time is, do you want to get something to eat? Right? Like when you think about it.
Grab a cup of coffee, grab a drink.
Yeah. It's a 5-word phrase that almost invariably is life-changing, and you don't even realize it until you really look back on it, whether it's with a significant other or it's, you meet with a mentor or you meet somebody like, hey, you want to go grab something to eat really quickly? And that becomes a lifelong friendship. Something that seems so meaningless at the time is like life-changing, and you can pinpoint back to those 5 words, and it's kind of fascinating to see. Kind of like your point, someone you knew your whole life, and then, at one point you're like, hey, I want to go grab some dinner, I want to get something to eat, and then boom, change the trajectory of your life, which is wild.
Yeah, totally. I love that. That's an interesting way to put it, or an interesting focus on it. Maybe I take it for granted. I've been in, maybe it's partly the jobs that I've had, partly my sort of natural inclinations, but like networking has always felt very natural to me. So I love coffee culture, right? Like let's go have a chat, whatever it is. But yeah, I could see that being a piece of advice that go meet people. People are interesting, and be interested in people. You will learn a lot, right?
One of probably someone that one other John Mark friend, Jason, talked about when he was in college, he lost a game, signed an autograph for a child at the end of the game, and then it was like 10 something years later, that child's dad saw him playing and was like, hey man, like we need to talk. Your professional career's over. Okay. But I met you years ago and you were nice to my child. You probably don't even remember this. And then that conversation, that event that he did, 10 years prior, changed the trajectory of his life because that person introduced him to his business partner. Yeah. And it's so wild. Like, you talk about networking, meeting a lot of people, 9 times out of 10, maybe it doesn't become anything. But every now and again, like one of those random events, you can pinpoint back to the time you met that person, like completely life-changing. And you never know when it's going to happen, which is kind of funny.
So all you can do is just keep doing it, right?
Just keep
Yeah.
saying yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just keep staying available to opportunity. It's the biggest thing. I guess the
So,
last question would
oh, go
be,
ahead.
yeah, what media are you into these days? Like, what books, podcasts, if any? I know you're probably reading a lot more things based on funds and prospectuses than anything. But in that free time, what books, podcasts are you listening to? You mentioned Jocko.
I like Jocko Willink. I think I don't have time for the 2.5 hour podcast format very often, but once in a
Yeah,
while I get a good piece of wisdom out of that. Honestly, I have I have this big stack of like business books that I want to read at some point that have been really good ideas. I've been doing a lot of the sort of required reading in the search fund ecosystem. So there's
yeah.
the Harvard Business School Guide to Buying a Small Business, the Stanford Search Fund Prime. There's a bunch of like that kind of stuff, which is sort of technical and required. And then outside of that, I read a ton of parenting stuff because I've got a 3-year-old who doesn't like to sleep. And man, it has been a challenge trying to figure out like what is going to convince this kid to go to sleep tonight so we can all get some rest.
That's brutal.
So you're just trying to survive. You're just reading books for survival at this point.
A little bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Well, Chris, we're
Well,
coming
cool.
up on time. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, how can we find you? What's a good way for folks who are watching this to connect with you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it a website? How do we get in touch?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I do have a website for my search fund. It is a little bit bare bones at the moment, but you can find me at ospreyequity.com. That's the name of my fund. We didn't talk about ospreys. There's a cool backstory with my wife and ospreys, but we might have to save that for another time. Anyway, you can find me at ospreyequity.com or on LinkedIn, and I love networking. So if anybody who is listening to this wants to have a chat, I'd be happy to.
Cool.
Awesome,
We'll link
Chris.
everything.
Your logo is awesome, by the way. So when we looked through the paperwork, we're like, man, that's nice. I like it a lot.
I appreciate that. Yeah, got to have something catchy.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Well,
Well,
Chris, thanks so much. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Like, again, fascinating background, fascinating concept. We wish you all the best in the search fund. And if you want any connections that we have, we'd be happy to make those introductions for you.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.